Good day, everyone. My name is Duke Traxxas, and you're watching Kansas City is a Drag. Today, I'll be talking about the history of drag artistry in Kansas City, Missouri, how it started as a vaudevillian art form, and how it was transformed into the performance art we all know and love today.
A drag queen? A drag queen? I am the queen of drag.
RuPaul Charles may be the queen of drag, but drag artistry hasn't always been showgirls and glamazons. In fact, this proud art wasn't even called drag when it first started out. Our story begins with the vaudeville acts of the early 20th century. Female impersonators like Mr. Half and Half. Throughout the Prohibition era, many bars and clubs had to shutter their businesses. But Kansas City was different. Kansas City had Tom Pendergast. Eventually, vaudeville will become the parent of a few branches of entertainment, including what we consider drag today. While drag quickly overtook vaudeville as a staple in the Kansas City queer community, predominantly at bars like Dante's Inferno and the Jewel Box, which featured top performers like Skip Arnold and Ray Bourbon, there were still many external issues pressuring the queer community into hiding their art, into hiding their true selves. On top of the AIDS epidemic and the gross mishandling of the public health crisis by Reagan and his administration, queer voices were continuously excluded in the public sphere. Interracial marriage was federally legalized in the United States in 1967, and it took nearly 50 years after that to achieve marriage equality for same-sex partnerships and all the rights and privileges that come with it. Thankfully, since the late 2000s, queer acceptance has come a long way, and we're going to also learn about this from a perspective of a drag queen later in this podcast. We'll also learn how some performers become drag queens and what their experience as a celebrity means to them. What is vaudeville? You might think that vaudeville is all feathered boas and music boxes and one angry man chasing after a stupid man. But you're wrong! Somewhat. Vaudeville shows are essentially antiquated variety shows. Performers would band together as a troupe, and this troupe would migrate like a circus does and put on their talent shows wherever they set up camp. Of course, there were fewer death-defying feats in vaudeville and more musical and comedy acts, but all in all, vaudeville helped set the stage for drag artistry in later decades. As vaudeville was reaching its first peak in popularity, a terrible tragedy befell the states, the 19th Amendment. Prohibition of the production, transportation, sale, and consumption of all alcohol was in effect from 1920 through 1933. While this didn't decrease the prevalence of alcohol consumption nearly as dramatically as its supporters believed it would, it did force such consumption into secrecy. Speakeasies opened up in cities all across the nation, illegally serving liquor to the people who would keep their cool and not snitch about it. Unbeknownst to many, Kansas City was about to see a massive transformation in its nightlife. Allegedly, Tom Pendergast was a bootlegger of alcohol and had his hands in many officials' pockets, bribing people to help him distribute his illicit substance. This included loans to many bars in the city, and with all that Pendergast money and Pendergast booze came Pendergast protection. Bars of all kinds were privy to such benefits, for lack of a better term, and that included what would be known as gay bars like Dante's Inferno. Due to the patronage of Dante's Inferno, one type of vaudevillian became more popular to watch than any other: female impersonators. Society was accepting of impersonators, so long as the performer was a straight male underneath the fashion and the makeup. But there were some bumps in this evolution from within the pre-drag community. Enter Mr. Half and Half. According to public records on Ancestry.com, Edna Mae Jacobs, formerly Briggs, formerly Whitehouse, was born in April 1904 in the state of Kansas. She married Samuel Riggs and had 3 children, but I have no clue what happened between her first and second marriage due to the inaccessibility of Ancestry's more in-depth features. But we do know that she would eventually marry a man named Joe Jacobs. As a female impersonator, she went by many stage names over her career, including Eddie Lynn. She performed at Dante's frequently as part of a duo with Billy Richards. As stated before, most impersonators of the time were straight men. What made Edna Mae's act special was that she was representing herself as a man, impersonating a woman. She got the name Mr. Half and Half from a famous photo now showing on the screen. For those of you who cannot see the screen, it depicts Edna Mae Jacobs wearing 2 distinct outfits in one. A suit dons her left half, and a dress dons her right half, and they are combined in the middle, thus the name Half and Half. If you viewed her outfit from one side, you'd only be able to see the feminine aspect, and if you were only viewing it from the other side, you would only be able to see the masculine. When looking at contemporary drag artists from all across the world, there are some similarities between Gottmik of RuPaul's Drag Race Season 13 and RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars Season 9 fame, and Edna Mae Jacobs. Both individuals were assigned female at their births, and both portray themselves as women while a male identity lies underneath the facade of makeup. Initially, one may consider it counterintuitive to go through this whole process that trans and non-binary individuals go through to portray themselves, other than the sex or gender that they've been assigned at birth. However, some queens, including Gottmik, have said that they do drag because it's one of the ways she can actually show herself as a man. Since society expects a drag queen to be a man wearing a caricature of femininity, seeing a feminine drag queen helps such trans individuals be seen as who they are as men underneath that makeup. While I will not and cannot say that Edna Mae Jacobs was transgender herself, or whatever labels of the time she would have used to describe herself, I still think that it's pretty interesting that these stories can transcend time like this. To preface this section, I must address the fact that being a drag artist does not automatically mean that you are a transgender person. Likewise, no transgender person is inherently a drag queen or king. While there are a plethora of members of the LGBTQIA+ community who have discovered their identities through drag, there are plenty of cisgender performers who have never had a question about their identity in gender or sex. There are even performers who identify as straight. One more time to reiterate, while being a drag queen or king and being transgender are not mutually exclusive, they are not codependent either. Now, on to the history. In 1946, over 20 years before the Stonewall riots were to happen, a huge step forward for social progress was made. Kansas City dropped a specific code that technically criminalized wearing gender non-conforming clothing, or men wearing dresses and women wearing pants. This coupled with the opening of a new bar, the Jewel Box, paved another stone in the road towards gender and sexual equality, both in Kansas City and the United States at large. Like Dante's Inferno, the Jewel Box would become the prime gay bar of the Kansas City metropolitan area, and would ultimately be billed as Mid-America's greatest fun complex, and the club became a well-known regional tourist destination for a largely middle-class heterosexual audience. Due to its popularity as a tourist destination, the Jewel Box had a very steady, very handsome stream of income, and as a result, they were able to host a wide variety of top ticketing talent, including Skip Arnold and the infamous Ray Bourbon. Both impersonators were primarily comedians, but like most other performers at the time, they also sang live. Both of these performers were also very famous across the country, with Ray allegedly being in Hollywood productions prior to settling down in Kansas City for the remainder of their life. Allegedly is an interesting word. I've certainly used it many times before in this script and in my own personal life, and I will be using it at least a few more times. How queer is it that we must dance around such topics by utilizing allegedly, since we have so few sources about so many topics that are sparsely evidential? But outside of allegations, what we do know about Bourbon is that they led a very unknown life, hence all the allegedlys. They told many fabrications about their life to government officials and public audiences alike. There was even a rumor that circulated about them having undergone gender reassignment surgery in the 50s, though little evidence has been found to corroborate this rumor. What we do know about Ray Bourbon is that their drag was very outrageous and scandalous even for the time. Unfortunately, there's very little surviving media of this era that is available online and in archives, but I have what I could find up on the screen now and throughout the rest of this video.
I don't want to be a madam, I just want to be one of the girls. I know I'm not pretty, I know I'm not cute, but I'd like to kick my heels up in a house of ill repute. I don't want to be a madam, I want to be one of the girls.
Now wasn't that just lovely? In its origin, drag was not meant to be performed or enjoyed by queer people. Society shaped it for the cisgender heterosexual men, both as the ones who entertain and the ones who observe. As the decades progressed, gay men were able to be more public about their sexuality in gay spaces. With this gradual acceptance, drag evolved to be much more for gay men than it was for straight men. As we approach the modern age,
drag is for everyone or else, and everyone will do drag!
And thanks to the work of drag queens like RuPaul, who are known on an international level, drag has been able to be an accepting creative outlet while doubling as a political statement. To get an insight as to how the drag scene evolved in Kansas City from its pre-modern to its modern stage, I interviewed a bartender, Robert, who is professionally known as Marbell Red at Missy B's. Marbell Red began working at Missy B's as a bartender around the time it first opened its doors to business in 1994. They had no real experience with drag before becoming a bartender, but they had spent their college years studying the theater and working at the Kansas City Renaissance Festival in the costuming department. Today, many young people watch shows like RuPaul's Drag Race and the Boulet Brothers' Dragula. these young people are able to absorb that knowledge and history about drag and the artists that perform. Some of them even go so far as to start doing drag themselves. Marbell didn't have that. Instead, most performers in the drag scene from the last several decades never even thought they'd become a professional performer in the first place, the oldest of which didn't even grow up when drag queen was the common phrase to describe such artists. Marbell first got into drag because they were asked by the bar staff if they'd be willing to do some shows as a drag queen. Since Marbell had the costuming experience and the makeup skills, as well as the availability to perform, they agreed. Now, many performers, drag queens or otherwise, will tend to have inspirations or idols that influence their work. Comedic performers end up being able to imitate such idols as Cher, Beyoncé, Nicki Minaj, Ozzy Osbourne, and Patti LuPone. In fact, these particular mentions are among the more popular and notable performances in RuPaul's Snatch Game, which has been a staple on that show since season 2. As a quick tangent, Snatch Game, for those of you who aren't enlightened to the fandom, is a challenge where all the queens that are still in the competition for the season will impersonate a celebrity or a character in a parody of classic television's game show, Match Game. As Marbell's act grew, they ended up becoming more or less of a Bette Midler impersonator themselves, and became what is known in the drag community as somewhat of a pageant queen. Speaking of communities, we see a lot of talk on social media and reality television the presence of drag houses or drag families. Many artists today will have a primary performer that helped them become drag performers themselves, affectionately known as a drag mother or drag father. In Kansas City, one of the most famous and prominent drag families is House Uchawi. According to Emily Spradling in an article written for kcstudio.org, Uchawi means magic in Swahili, and at the same time, also witchcraft. It's the awe of sleight of hand mixed with the fear of the unknown and otherworldly. The House of Uchawi is intentional in their chosen name because they deliver the magic through the excitement of performance and the witchcraft through an art form that is still taboo in many communities. However, the existence of such families wasn't always the case. Rather, Marbell says that when they started doing drag, it was very much a communal effort, where everyone helped everyone with touching up makeup, borrowing or making outfits, and perfecting show routines. While such camaraderie still exists in workrooms across the world, it was very much the foundation for how the drag community would grow and evolve over the last 3 decades. Changes outside of the community are also very obvious when you compare drag shows of today to drag shows of the 90s or even the 2000s. In Marbell's view, it took quite a long while for public acceptance of drag, whether it be as a cross-dresser, gender impersonator, or a drag king or drag queen, and even longer for trans people to be accepted as drag artists themselves. Before we leave the subject of drag competitions, such as RuPaul's Drag Race or the Boulet Brothers Dragula, I'd like to talk about how not every drag performer is a fan or proponent of such competitions. Despite the show's popularities amongst their audiences, Marbell sees programs like these as meaning to be entertaining and not entirely realistic. The talent is there, but the shows are there to make money. When asked for advice for any up-and-coming performers, Marbell says, "I think it's true of all performers. We have a persona that we have to wear all the time. There's very few places I go that don't know Marbell Red, even straight bars, and they expect me to be Marbell Red." When asked about the modern era of drag in Kansas City, Marbell said that Missy B's is the neighborhood bar. It's the place to go to feel welcomed. And they also said that drag queens like Daisy Bouquet are amazing performers, and implied that such performers will be a guiding force of how drag evolves into tomorrow. Thanks to people like Edna Mae Jacobs, Ray Bourbon, and even crime boss Tom Pendergast, drag was able to not just thrive in Kansas City, but evolve. From the simple vaudeville acts to proper female impersonators, Kansas City has been a haven for queer performers regardless of labels. Now, why am I doing this? As a queer person who's interested in history and drag, I believe that queer history has long gone unrecorded as a means to erase us from humanity's existence. Because of this, being queer is a political statement in a day and age where trans rights, gay rights, and even non-queer rights are still at risk of being revoked. By recording the now and bringing light to the yesteryear, I'm able to do my humble part in recovering and recording our existence for our posterity. Generations of stars have come and gone in the drag scene in Kansas City, and those generations set the stage for modern performers to do what they do and to say what they say. The fight for queer rights has been a long fight, and we still have a long ways to go. But Kansas City has been a stronghold of resistance against oppressive heteronormativity for all this time, as evidenced by its status as a home of modern drag.